The lights hit like lightning. A sudden blast of white and gold tore through the darkness of the arena as 70,000 people surged to their feet. The roar a living thing. The band had already taken their positions. Brian May's fingers were coiled over his guitar like a falcon ready to strike, Roger Taylor spinning his drumsticks with practiced rhythm. But no one looked at them. All eyes were on the empty space at center stage. And then, the flash of a silhouette. Tight white pants. A silk sash glinting with silver thread. Black boots polished like mirrors. And above it all, the unmistakable figure of Freddie Mercury. He didn't walk. He arrived. One slow, deliberate step into the light. Another, then a sudden whirl of the mic's stand, twirling it in his grip like a scepter. He lifted his chin, eyes gleaming, mustache neatly trimmed. His once thick arms had thinned, cheekbones more prominent than ever under the glow. But the swagger remained. And when his voice hit, musical note, I want it all, musical note. Wembley exploded. The crowd was already a wave of heat and electricity. But when Freddie launched into first verse, they became a single body. Tens of thousands of voices screamed the lyrics back at him, hands pounding the air in unison, hearts pulsing to the rhythm of Queen. But something was different. Brian May noticed at first. The way Freddie's legs trembled slightly after a long note. The way he gripped the mic stand tighter than usual. He usually tossed it like a baton. Tonight, it was his cane. Roger Taylor caught it next, exchanging a glance with bassist John Deacon during the chorus. Freddie missed the re-entry by half a beat. Subtle, but for them unmistakable. The crowd didn't notice. Not yet. Musical note. I want it all and I want it now. Musical note. Freddie hit the final note with the force of a man chasing the sun before it vanished. His head flung back. Sweat fly from his hair like fireworks. The lights cut to black just as he dropped to one knee. Then silence. A strange, weighty silence. Not the kind that follows an epic performance, but something tighter, more delicate. The band froze in place. A single spotlight ignited center stage. Freddie was still kneeling, breathing hard, one hand on the floor to steady himself. He looked up into the beam of light, blinking slowly. The crowd didn't cheer. They waited. He rose to his feet slowly, like lifting himself in the weight of gravity itself. Then he stepped into the circle of light and brought the mic to his lips, not to shout, but to speak. I don't have many left of me tonight, he said, his voice quiet, smoky, almost tender. But the ones I do... He looked out into the dark sea of faces, lips curled into the ghost of a smile. I'll give to you. A ripple moved through the crowd. A few shouts, a few tears. But most stood in frozen reverence. Freddie turned away from the spotlight and walked toward the shadows. He was supposed to head off stage for a quick wardrobe change. A tech assistant moved forward to guide him. Freddie gently waved him off. I'm fine, darling, he whispered, just catching my breath. Backstage, whispers spread like brush fire. Did you hear what he said? Is he all right? He's never said something like that before. Brian stepped over and grabbed a towel. He's pushing too hard. He's Freddie, Roger muttered, as if that explained everything, and maybe it did. Freddie stood alone in the darkness behind the curtains for a few seconds. He ran his fingers along the back of his neck, eyes closed, letting the hum of the crowd wash over him like a tide. His chest ached, not from exertion. He opened his eyes and looked into a mirror propped on the wall. His own reflection stared back, older, thinner, but still defiant. He touched the base of his throat, just under the collarbone, where he could feel his heartbeat thrumming hard. A voice in his head whispered something he'd been trying to ignore for weeks. This could be the last. He looked down at the small handwritten set list on the crate beside him. The final song slot was still blank. All the others were printed and rehearsed, but not the last one. He grabbed a pen. Back on stage, the band vamped the opening to Under Pressure. Brian stretched the solo a little longer than usual, buying time. And then Freddie stepped back into the light. No jacket, no cape, no crown. Just a tank top, his mic stand, and that bone-deep charisma that couldn't be taught. The crowd went wild again, but it was softer now, not out of energy, out of respect. As he sang with Bowie's voice echoing to the sound system, his own voice cracked, barely audible in the mix. But he kept going, because he wasn't here to impress anyone anymore. He was here to give them something to remember. When the song ended and the lights dipped into blue and purple, Freddie took a long step forward. He paused, looked out at 70,000 souls. So many had been with him since the beginning. He felt them, felt all of them. "You lot," he said, voice raw now. "You've been with me through it all. You've been my bloody heartbeat." The crowd murmured. Shouts of "We love you, Freddie," rang out from all sides. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He turned his back to them again, took one step toward the wings. And then he paused. One hand lifted, fingers twitching in the air like he wanted to say something more. But he didn't. Instead, he nodded once and disappeared behind the curtain. Freddie Mercury whispered one last thing to the crowd. Fans still talk about it. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. The crowd outside throbbed like a living organism, still buzzing from the last song. But behind the curtain, the atmosphere felt suspended, like air just before a thunderstorm. You could feel something unspoken lingering in the space. Freddie sat slouched in the worn leather chair next to the wardrobe rack. A long white robe draped over his shoulders, half for show, half to hide the sweat now soaking through his shirt. His breathing was shallow, not from exertion, but because every movement now came with a cost. Across the room, Brian May stood with a guitar still slung over his shoulder, pretending to tune a string that didn't need adjusting. Roger Taylor sipped from a bottle of water, his foot tapping nervously on the concrete floor. John Deacon didn't speak. He rarely did in tense moments. But even his silence felt heavier than usual. Freddie finally broke it. "Well, that wasn't terrible," he said with a wink, though his voice rasped like gravel. Brian gave a half-smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He walked over slowly and crouched beside Freddie. "You okay?" Freddie paused, gazing down at his trembling hands. Depends how you define it. The dressing room mirror reflected more than just a band. It captured a kind of fading brightness, the final flickers of something incandescent. Freddie looked up at himself, then over at the set list still pinned beside the makeup table. The last line was still blank. He picked up the Sharpie, drew a dot, then another, then nothing. "I've been thinking," Freddie said, not at anyone in particular. "Maybe we leave it blank." "Freddie," Roger said gently. "No, I mean it. Maybe the best encore is no encore at all. Just lights out." Silence again. Roger stepped forward. "They came for you. They came for us. You don't want to say goodbye." Freddie blinked slowly, then chuckled. "Darling, I've been saying goodbye since the day I started. Every note, every performance. They just didn't know it." He looked back at Brian, then at all three bandmates. "But maybe I do have something left." Brian sat back on the edge of the couch. "Then do it. One more. Say it how you want to say it." Freddie exhaled. Not a sigh, something deeper. A slow release of something invisible he'd been holding in his chest for months. "All right," he whispered. "One more." He reached for the Sharpie again. Slowly, deliberately, he wrote on the final line of the set list. "Love of my life, solo piano." Roger tilted his head. "That's not on the list." "No," Freddie said. "It's not." Minutes later, while the stage crew made minor adjustments, Freddie sat alone behind the curtain, away from the noise. His fingers tapped lightly on the arm of the chair in rhythm, like he was already playing the keys in his mind. He closed his eyes. And suddenly, he wasn't backstage anymore. He was home. Flashback. Garden Lodge, London. 2 months earlier. The piano in his study was silent. It hadn't been played in days. Freddie sat cross-legged on the floor, resting against a velvet couch, wrapped in a thin blanket. A cup of untouched tea cooled beside him. Mary Austin sat across from him, legs folded, her face etched with quiet concern. "You're thinking too loudly again," she said softly. He smiled weakly. "Am I ever quiet?" Mary leaned forward. "What's on your mind?" Freddie's fingers traced a pattern in the carpet absently. "Legacy," he said. "The music will speak for itself," she said quickly. "No," He interrupted. Not the music. Me. A long pause. They'll remember the costumes, the concerts, the madness. But I wonder, will they remember the man? Mary's voice trembled just slightly. The people who matter will. But what about the people who only got to know me from afar? Freddie asked. The ones in the crowd. The ones who only ever saw the show. You gave them joy. Freddie looked up, eyes glassy. But I never gave them truth. Back to present Stage Wings, Wembley. Freddie opened his eyes as the final chords of Radio GAJ echoed through the arena. The stage crew was dimming the lights. The final break before the encore. A young assistant approached with a towel. She couldn't have been more than 20. Nervous. Starstruck. Mr. Mercury, she said, holding the towel out. You were incredible. Freddie smiled, taking it gently. Thank you, darling. She hesitated. Is it true? This might be the last? Freddie didn't answer directly. He looked out at the crowd, still chanting his name, and said softly, You don't always get to choose the end, but you can choose the note you leave them with. He walked past her, past the cables and curtains, and crew members holding their breath. He stepped into the darkness one last time. Backstage, Brian watched him go, a knot forming in his chest. He turned to Roger, who was still gripping his drumsticks even offstage. He's doing Love of My Life. Alone. Yeah. Roger's jaw clenched. Then we stay quiet. We let him have it. Brian nodded. He's earned it. On stage, the crowd dimmed as the house lights dropped to deep indigo. A single spotlight flickered on. Freddie Mercury. No cape, no theatrics, no thunder, sat quietly at the grand piano. His fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. Then he began to play. The first notes of Love of My Life drifted like smoke into the silent air. The first few notes were soft, almost too soft to be heard above the breathless quiet of the arena. Freddie's fingers trembled slightly as they traced the intro chords of Love of My Life, a song he hadn't performed solo in years. His voice followed, not with grandeur, but with something achingly tender. Musical note, Love of My Life, You've hurt me. Musical note. The spotlight remained fixed on him, and the rest of the stage fell into darkness. He was utterly alone, and yet utterly exposed. 70,000 people leaning in, not dancing, not screaming, but listening. Some held their breath. Others just wept. Even those who didn't fully grasp the weight of what they were seeing felt it. Something beyond performance was happening. Something sacred. Backstage, Brian may stood frozen just beyond the curtain. A towel wrapped around his neck, eyes fixed on the shadow of his friend at the piano. He knew this song was never part of the encore. Not tonight. Not this show. But now he understood. Freddie wasn't performing for the crowd anymore. He was performing for himself. Musical note, Love of My Life, Don't Leave Me. Musical note. Freddie's voice cracked on leave. It was small, human, and it shattered the room. A man in the second row put a hand over his mouth and started sobbing. A teenage girl clutched her mother's arm and whispered, Why does it feel like he's saying goodbye? Freddie paused after the second chorus. Just a breath. Then his fingers rested on the keys. Silence. He looked out at the crowd, bathed in shadows and tears, and said, barely above a whisper, This isn't a concert anymore, is it? A few stunned chuckles broke through. Freddie smiled gently. It's something else. Something more. He looked down at the keys. I never told you all how much you saved me, but you did. Every bloody one of you. You gave me a life most people only dream about. And now, he shrugged, now I want to give something back. One last thing. He didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. Then he launched into the final verse, and something changed in his voice. It wasn't power, it was purpose. Fragile, almost cracking, but filled with the kind of soul that burns brightest just before the candle dies. Musical note, hurry back, musical note. His voice dipped lower. Musical note, don't take it away from me. Musical note. Tears streamed down faces in the crowd. Not fans anymore. Witnesses. Musical note, because you don't know. Musical note. He looked up. Musical note, what it means to me. musical note. As the final chord faded, Freddie lifted his hands from the keys and held them in the air as if releasing something he'd carried for decades. The arena was still, not a single scream. No applause, just silence. Then, Freddie leaned toward the microphone. No music, no lights, no flourish, and he whispered something into it. Just one sentence. Too quiet for most of the crowd to hear. No one backstage caught it. It wasn't amplified. It wasn't repeated. But a handful of people near the front, close enough to hear the breath in his voice, heard it, or thought they did. The words were gone almost as quickly as they arrived. Freddie sat still for another few seconds, gazing at the sea of people, then stood slowly. Backstage, Roger Taylor pressed both hands to his mouth. John Deacon had tears running down his face. Brian May stood still, unmoving, watching Freddie rise. He whispered to himself, "That's it then." Freddie walked to the front of the stage. This time, no fanfare, no fireworks, no crown or royal robe. Just a man. Just Freddie. He stood at the edge of the platform, scanning the crowd. Everywhere he looked, people were crying. Some clutched their hearts. Some pressed hands over their mouths. Some just stared, frozen, as if afraid to blink and lose a moment. He raised his hand, fingers trembling, and waved. The gesture was small, final. Then he stepped back into the shadows. The arena stayed silent for a beat longer than it should have. Then someone shouted, "We love you, Freddie." Another screamed, "Don't go!" But by then he was gone. The curtain fell. The lights dimmed. The house music didn't even start, because no one was ready to return to the real world. That night, as thousands of fans left the stadium, people clung to one question. What did he say? A group of friends argued outside the venue gates. He whispered something. "I swear it." "No, it was just a breath." "No," he said, "keep singing." "I heard it." Another woman swore, he said, "When I'm gone, sing louder." A teenager on TikTok posted a blurry bootleg video shot from the front row. In it, you could barely see Freddie's mouth move, but the audio was too quiet to pick anything up. Still, the post went viral. Hashtag #FreddieSWhisper began trending that night. Thousands began speculating. Everyone wanted to believe they heard it or knew someone who did. A shared myth was born in real time. The press, surprisingly, said little the next day. Rolling Stone simply wrote, "Last night, Freddie Mercury didn't just give a concert. He gave a farewell and perhaps a blessing. But those who were there, they would never forget it." The door to the dressing room clicked shut behind him. Freddie leaned against it. The roar of the crowd muffled now. Distant thunder behind a veil. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there for a long moment, hands trembling at his sides. Then he laughed. Quietly. Well, he muttered to no one. That was rather dramatic, wasn't it? His knees finally gave way, and he slumped into the chair beside the vanity mirror. Sweat streaked his makeup. His chest rose and fell in shallow waves. Across the room, Brian May entered. Silently. No words. He didn't need any. He just walked up behind Freddie and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You said something," Brian said quietly. At the end, "Into the mic." Freddie didn't look up. "Did I?" Brian crouched beside him, searching his face. What was it? A pause. Then Freddie smiled, but not with his mouth. It was in his eyes. Something sad. Something at peace. Not everything has to be for the record, Bree. The next morning, global headlines. Freddie's farewell? Mercury stuns crowd with final whisper. Queen's frontman gives stripped-down solo. Was this goodbye? News outlets scramble for footage. Reporters race for quotes. Social media lit up like a wildfire across continents. Did anyone catch what he said? "We heard it in Section A3, he whispered. When I'm gone, sing louder." "My boyfriend swears," he said, "it's your turn now." It was, "I love you. Don't forget me." Theories multiplied by the hour. 2 days later, a small studio in London. A bootleg VHS tape arrived in a plain brown envelope. No return address. Inside Queen's archival office, a young assistant named Hannah loaded the tape, trembling. Grainy footage, shaky camera, Freddie at the piano, the final verse, the fade out, the whisper. She turned the volume to max rewound, listened again. Still nothing clear, just a faint sound of breath, and perhaps 3 words. She marked the timestamp. That night, Hannah uploaded a cleaned-up version to an anonymous YouTube channel. Freddie Mercury's Final Whisper, enhanced audio. It reached 10 million views in 2 days. The comment section was a storm of guesses. He said, "Keep singing. I'm sure of it. It was just the wind and the mic. No, I heard it clearly. You are the music now." Freddie's flat, Garden Lodge, London. Mary Austin sat in his study, surrounded by unopened fan mail, letters that still arrived every week. She watched the clip for the 10th time that day. The video paused at the exact moment Freddie leaned into the mic. She looked away. She didn't need the audio. She knew what he had said. Freddie had whispered it to her before. In the kitchen, on a quiet morning 2 weeks before the show, he had stirred his tea and said, almost to himself, "If I don't make it to Christmas, I want them to sing louder. I want them to remember the joy, not the pain." She blinked back tears, not because it was sad, but because he got his wish. Backstage footage leaked. A month later, unseen footage emerged from a backstage camera positioned near the curtain. It showed Freddie walking off stage, his body heaving with exhaustion. A runner approached, asking if he needed help. He waved her off. Then he looked at the curtain, paused, and whispered something one more time, this time to himself. That's how you say goodbye. Interview. Brian May on BBC Radio 1. The interviewer leaned in. "Brian, you've never spoken publicly about what Freddie whispered. Do you know what he said?" Brian looked out the studio window for a long moment before answering. "No, not exactly. But I was standing just off stage, and I've replayed it in my head 1,000 times. He smiled softly. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe it's meant to be different things to different people." He looked back at the interviewer. "But I can tell you this. Whatever he said, he meant it." Years pass. The whisper becomes legend. Concerts across the world begin to honor that final moment. At Queen tribute shows, a tradition begins. Just before the final song, the music fades and a silence falls. The crowd leans in. Then a pre-recorded clip of Freddie's whisper, now digitally remastered, plays softly through the speakers. Most can't make out the words, but they still cry, because it doesn't matter what he said. It matters that he said it. Fan reaction, documentary clip. A young fan sits in front of her laptop, tears streaming down her face as she replays the footage. "I wasn't even born when he died," she says, voice shaking. "But it feels like he's still talking to us. Like he left us with something." She wipes her face. That whisper? It's a reminder. That music doesn't die. That he didn't die. Not really. In the studio, the piano. Queen eventually donates the grand piano Freddie played that night to the British Music Hall of Fame. It sits beneath a glass dome, untouched. Visitors lean close. There's a plaque beneath it. Engraved are the final lines of Love of My Life. And beneath that, in italics, he whispered something into the silence. We're still listening. The whisper never faded. It was never truly heard. Not clearly, not definitively, but somehow it lived louder than anything Freddie Mercury had ever belted from the deepest corners of his soul. It echoed not in decibels, but in hearts, in the silences between chords, in the tears that fell when the music stopped. And though the world never agreed on what exactly he said, it didn't matter anymore, because by the time the whisper became legend, everyone had already decided what it meant to them. London, 10 years later, a candlelit vigil gathers at Wembley on the anniversary of that final concert. Tens of thousands of people from across the globe sit shoulder to shoulder on the grass, flashlights flickering, phone screens raised in reverence. On a massive screen, archival footage plays. Freddie at the piano had bowed over the final verse of Love of My Life, his fingers on the keys. That last line, that moment, and just before the screen fades to black, the whisper, it's still inaudible, a soft breath. But in the crowd, they all whisper together anyway. When I'm gone, sing louder. No one knows if that's what he actually said. But that night, it becomes truth. Rio de Janeiro, 2016. A little boy stands on the shoulders of his father at Rock in Rio, waving a handmade sign that reads, "Freddie, I'm still singing for you." He's never known a world where Freddie Mercury was alive, but he knows every lyric, every movement, every whispered story passed down by his mother, who stood in Wembley's front row when she was just 16. On stage, Adam Lambert joins the surviving members of Queen. The set pauses. The lights dim. Brian May steps to the mic. "Before we begin this next one," he says, voice trembling, "we ask for a moment of silence for the man who told us to sing louder." The crowd goes still. For 10 full seconds, the night holds its breath. And then, musical note, is this the real life musical note? The moment shatters into song. Tokyo, a small apartment, 2 a.m. A young woman, mid-20s, sits at a desk surrounded by open notebooks. She's been struggling for hours to write lyrics to a new ballad. Nothing fits. Nothing feels honest. She closes her laptop. She turns her eyes to a photo tacked on the wall above her keyboard. Freddie Mercury, mid-performance. Eyes fierce, mouth open, sweat pouring down his neck. And beneath it, scribbled in black ink, "When I'm gone, sing louder." She wipes her face, places her fingers on the keys, and she begins to write. Cambridge University, lecture hall. A professor of musicology holds up a faded bootleg cassette. "This," she says, "was recorded by a fan from the second row during Freddie Mercury's final performance. And though the whisper on it is nearly imperceptible, it has inspired thousands of interpretations, artworks, poems, symphonies." She smiles. It's proof that sometimes mystery outlasts clarity, that silence can roar. The class sits riveted. In music, it's not just the notes that matter, it's the space between them. She presses play, and for a moment, Freddie's whisper fills the room, softer than breath, quieter than memory, yet louder than anything else ever recorded. Interview, Mary Austin, years later. She sits by the garden at Garden Lodge, now a private memorial space for fans and friends. A journalist asked the question carefully. "You were with him for so long. You heard the whisper backstage, didn't you? Or maybe before. Did he ever tell you what he was going to say?" Mary smiles. It's not a sad smile, but the kind that lives between grief and peace. "He told me 100 things, some of them loud, some of them quiet. But Freddie didn't believe in endings. He believed in passing the mic." She turns to the garden, where wind chimes ring in the distance. "So, whatever he said, I think it was permission, a blessing, an invitation." She looks back at the camera, to sing, even when it hurts. Los Angeles, the Oscars. Years after Bohemian Rhapsody wins Best Picture, Queen takes the stage at the Academy Awards. The auditorium is packed with stars in tuxedos and gowns. As the crowd applauds, the lights dim. Roger Taylor stands. Brian May joins him. A screen above them shows Freddie, eyes burning, fists in the air, triumphant in a flash of white light. Then the footage cuts to black. Just Freddie's voice whispering, a breath, a murmur, and then text appears. "When I'm gone, sing louder." The audience rises in a standing ovation before a single note is played. Freddie's grave, Montreux, Switzerland. There's no gravestone, just a plaque on Lake Geneva, where his ashes were quietly scattered. And yet, people come in droves. Flowers, notes, candles, headphones left behind, playing Don't Stop Me Now on a loop. One note rests near the water, written in French. "Je t'entends toujours. I still hear you." And on the back, in English, "I was there. I heard the whisper. I don't care what the tape says." It was, "I'm not gone. I'm just waiting in the song." The final tribute, live stage, future day. A hologram stage, future tech, tens of thousands of fans. Freddie's likeness appears in crystal clarity, lifted from old footage. As he walks across the stage, a pre-recorded track plays "Love of My Life." But as the final verse approaches, the crowd sings it for him. Soft at first, then louder, and before the hologram fades, one final line plays in Freddie's real voice. You know what to do now. And the screen goes dark. The audience waits. Then, as if on cue, tens of thousands whisper as one. When I'm gone, sing louder. Epilogue. It never mattered what exactly he said. What mattered is that he left them listening. And in that whisper, softer than the wind, smaller than a heartbeat, he gave them a responsibility to carry the melody, to fill the silence, to become the echo. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.